Close your eyes, take a deep, steady breath. Let the weight of the modern world, the flickering screens, the relentless pace, the noise of the present slowly dissolve into the shadows of the room. You are not here, in this moment, anymore. You are travelling backward, further than you have ever gone before, across centuries, across millennia, through the shifting sands of time, until the map of the world as you know it disappears. Welcome to a place that existed before history had a name. We are standing at the edge of the Fertile Crescent, where the twin rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, carve a path of life through the golden expanse of ancient deserts. Here, over 5,000 years ago, the silence of the earth was broken by the first true heartbeat of human society. Imagine the dawn breaking over a horizon that had never seen a city wall. Picture the first men and women looking at the turbulent, life-giving waters of these rivers, realizing that for the first time they did not have to follow the seasonal migration of the beasts. They could stay, they could build, they could dream of something lasting. This was the moment humanity stopped just surviving and started creating, from the humble mud brick hut to the towering ziggurat that reached toward the stars. This is the cradle of everything we are today. We are entering a world of scribes and kings, of astronomers watching the celestial dance, and of the very first laws ever etched into stone. It is a world where humanity first dared to write down its own story, its fears and its hopes. But it was not an easy birth. It was a land of constant metamorphosis, a place where empires rose like the sun and vanished like the morning dew. We are here to witness the rise of the Sumerians, the ambition of the Akkadians, and the majesty of the Babylonians. As we drift into this narrative, I invite you to leave behind the need for precision and simply absorb the rhythm of the past. Let the history of Mesopotamia become the lullaby of your subconscious, a reminder that before our modern complexities there was a simpler yet profound struggle for meaning. You're about to walk the streets of Ur, walk under the shadow of hanging gardens, and listen to the whispers of a civilization that taught the world how to count, how to measure, and how to govern. There is no violence here, only the echoes of human ingenuity. There is no urgency, only the slow, rhythmic turning of the pages of time. Let the cool, desert night air settle over you as we begin our journey into the oldest story ever told. The channel Sleepy History with Kevin is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. In the beginning, the land between the rivers was not a collection of empires, but a collection of dreams etched into the silt. Think of the landscape as a vast, shifting canvas of marshland and wild grasses, frequently transformed by the unpredictable, powerful flooding of the Tigris and the Euphrates. The early inhabitants were not conquerors. They were observers, patient students of the river's cycle. They learnt that the very water that could wash away a season's labour was also the only force capable of turning the arid dust into a lush, green paradise. This realization sparked the first great revolution in human history, the mastery of the landscape itself. It was a subtle, almost quiet shift in the rhythm of life. Men and women began to dig channels, creating intricate webs of irrigation that guided the river's generosity to fields that had never known the touch of a plough. This was not just work, it was the birth of cooperation. To maintain these canals, you needed neighbours. To share the water, you needed agreements. To secure the harvest, you needed a common purpose. And so the first villages transformed. They grew denser, turning into town centres and eventually into the world's first true cities. The most famous among them was Uruk. Imagine walking through the gates of Uruk 5 millennia ago. You wouldn't hear the roar of engines or the clatter of modern industry. Instead, you would hear the rhythmic sound of mud bricks being moulded by hand, the gentle lowing of cattle, and the murmur of a marketplace where the first tokens of trade were exchanged. Life in these early city-states was governed by a profound connection to the divine. The people of Sumer believed that the city did not belong to the people but to the gods. Every ziggurat, that towering mountain of clay and sun-baked brick, was built as a bridge, a place where the earthly realm met the celestial. These structures were the anchors of their society. As you look up at these monuments in your mind's eye, see them not as relics of a forgotten past, but as symbols of humanity's first attempt to organize its world around a higher meaning. There was a unique beauty in this order. Without a central empire to dictate their every move, the people of the early Sumerian city-states found stability in their rituals and their local governance. They created the first social hierarchies where the priest, the farmer, and the artisan each held a vital piece of the puzzle. They were not just surviving, they were curating a culture. They were observers of the stars, noting the patterns in the night sky with a precision that would eventually define our own understanding of time. It is important to understand that this was a period of slow, deliberate discovery. There was no rush to conquer or expand. There was only the desire to exist in harmony with the environment and the deities they perceived within it. They created the foundation of everything that would follow, the concept of the city as a sanctuary, the importance of collective labor, and the awe-inspiring belief that human effort could reach toward the heavens. As you drift further into this scene, imagine the cool evening breeze blowing off the Euphrates, cooling the sun-warmed bricks of the city wall, and feel the sense of belonging that must have permeated the hearts of those early pioneers. As the cities of Sumer grew, so did the complexity of their lives. A simple life of farming and ritual soon demanded something more: the need to remember. Think of the trader at the market needing to keep track of bushels of grain. Think of the priest needing to account for the offerings given to the temples. Human memory, as reliable as it could be, was no longer enough to contain the growing prosperity of the city-states. In the quiet corners of the temple complexes, something transformative was happening. It began not with grand literature, but with the humble clay token, a pressed shape in wet mud, to represent a transaction. Over time, these tokens evolved into pictograms, simple drawings etched with a reed stylus. But then a moment of genius occurred. The symbols began to represent not just objects, but sounds. The scribes of Mesopotamia had inadvertently unlocked the greatest treasure in history, the ability to capture a thought, a name, or a command, and fix it in time forever. This was the birth of cuneiform. Picture a scribe sitting in the soft morning light, a slab of wet clay resting on their lap. They press the wedge-shaped end of a reed into the soft surface. One mark, then another. They are not just recording wheat or sheep anymore. They are recording the names of kings, the movements of the stars, and eventually the very songs of the soul. This was the first time in human history that a person could speak to someone they would never meet across a distance of time that would span thousands of years. Imagine the weight of that silence being broken by the written word. It was as if humanity had finally opened its eyes to its own legacy. For the first time, laws were not just whispered traditions passed from father to son. They were carved into reality, making justice something that could be seen and referenced. It brought a sense of stability and predictability to society that hadn't existed before. When laws are written, the king becomes accountable, and the citizen gains a measure of security. Beyond the practical, this invention allowed for the first true expressions of human emotion. We find tablets that contain the frustrations of students, the prayers of the grieving, and the grand soaring narratives of the gods. It was a bridge of light built across the darkness of oblivion. As you listen to the cadence of this history, think of how much we owe to that first scribe, whose name is long lost to the dust, but whose handiwork has allowed us to understand the heart of their civilization. They were teaching us that our lives, our trades, and our loves are worthy of being recorded. The clay tablets of Mesopotamia are not just artifacts, they are the earliest echoes of our own voices. They remind us that the human desire to be known and to be remembered is a thread that runs through the very fabric of our species. Let your mind drift over the texture of those ancient clay tablets, hardened by the sun, preserving the whispers of a world that lived, breathed and thought exactly as we do today. To understand the people of Mesopotamia, you must look up, not just at the stars, but at the towering mountains of brick they built to reach them. These were the ziggurats. Imagine standing at the base of one of these colossal structures at twilight. The air is thick with the scent of burning cedar and incense. The city around you is quieting down, but the temple complex remains a heartbeat of activity, a bridge between the mortal realm and the domain of the gods. For the Mesopotamians, the world was a theatre of divine forces. They did not see the world through the lens of modern science. They saw it through the lens of divine agency. The unpredictable flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates was not merely a natural phenomenon. It was the breath of Enlil, the god of air and storms. The sun that scorched their fields was the gaze of Utu, the god of justice. Every success and every tragedy was a conversation with the divine. This belief system provided a profound sense of purpose. When they built a temple, they weren't just creating a house for a statue, they were inviting the divine presence to dwell among them, to protect the city, and to ensure the cycle of the seasons continued. It was a symbiotic relationship. The gods required nourishment through offerings and devotion, and in return they provided the order required for human life to flourish. Consider the atmosphere of a religious festival, thousands of people gathering under the vast open sky, the chanting of priests reverberating off the thick walls of the temple, the rhythmic beat of drums mirroring the beating of their own hearts. There was a comfort in this, a shared understanding that they were not alone in the vastness of the universe. Their lives were small, yes, but they were significant enough to be recognized by the powers that governed the cosmos. This spiritual perspective influenced everything: their architecture, their politics, and their daily routines. Even the way they organized their cities, with the temple at the very center, spoke to a society that prioritized the collective over the individual. They sought to reflect the harmony of the heavens in their own terrestrial affairs. It was a quest for balance. They knew that human existence was fragile, tethered to the whims of the rivers and the harshness of the climate. And so they clung to their rituals as a sailor clings to a rudder in a storm. As you drift into a deeper state of relaxation, let the image of the ziggurat fill your mind. See the long, wide stairs leading upward. See the temple at the summit, glowing in the soft light of the moon. Feel the stability of the sun-baked mud bricks under your feet. You are part of this grand, ancient order, a traveller wandering through a time when the world was new and the gods were felt in every breeze and every drop of rain. All stories on this channel, Sleepy History with Kevin, are fictional, thoughtfully crafted around historical themes and inspired by real events, figures, and periods, reimagined for engaging storytelling. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, book documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental. While the priests were busy interpreting the will of the gods, another group of thinkers, the scholars and the stargazers, were quietly mapping the mechanics of the universe. Have you ever wondered why there are 60 seconds in a minute or 60 minutes in an hour? Why we divide a circle into 360 degrees? We owe this legacy, the very skeleton of our modern timekeeping, to the patient minds of Mesopotamia. Imagine a scholar sitting on the roof of a house in Babylon, the desert air cool and crisp, the sky a vast velvet blanket of infinite stars. They were not just looking at the night sky, they were reading it like a book. They tracked the movements of planets that seemed to wander against the backdrop of fixed constellations. They charted the phases of the moon, realizing that time was a cycle, a repeating melody in the grand orchestra of the cosmos. By observing these patterns, they created the first calendars, allowing their people to predict the optimal times for planting and harvesting. This was the dawn of mathematics as a practical language. They developed a sexagesimal system, a base 60 numbering system, which is why we still measure time and angles the way we do today. They didn't have calculators or computers, only the power of observation and the meticulous recording of data on clay. They were building a model of the world, a way to quantify the infinite, bringing a sense of predictability to a life that was otherwise at the mercy of nature. It is truly humbling to realize that when you look at your watch or check the time on your phone, you're participating in a tradition that began thousands of years ago in the fertile plains between two rivers. It is a connection that bridges the gap between the ancient scribe and the modern dreamer. If you're finding yourself drifting into a state of profound calm while we explore these ancient connections, I invite you to join our community. Please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. By turning on notifications, you ensure that you never miss a moment of our nightly journey through the tapestry of human history. Your support allows us to keep crafting these immersive, peaceful stories, and it truly helps our channel grow so we can continue to share these quiet explorations of the past with more people around the world. As you reflect on this, let the thought settle. How much of our own lives is built upon the silent observations of those who came before us? They looked up at the same stars we see tonight. They felt the same wonder at the vastness of the space above. In the stillness of your room, you are not so different from them. You are part of the same long story, the same unending quest to understand our place in the universe. Let the rhythm of their math, the slow pulse of their timekeeping, guide you deeper into your rest. Beyond the grandeur of the ziggurats and the precision of the scholars, there was the vibrant, humming pulse of daily life. To understand Mesopotamia, one must walk through its bustling marketplaces, where the air was thick with the scent of dried dates, toasted sesame, and the sharp, earthy aroma of imported spices. This was a crossroads of the ancient world. Merchants arrived from distant mountains and faraway seas, bringing with them treasures that would have been unimaginable to the earliest settlers. Imagine the sound of commerce, a rhythmic cacophony of voices debating prices, the clatter of clay jars being stacked, and the rustle of woven wool being unrolled. The people of Mesopotamia were master traders. They did not have the luxury of abundant natural resources like stone or timber in the floodplains, so they became ingenious in their trade. They exchanged their surplus grain, their beautifully crafted textiles, and their intricate metalwork for the cedars of Lebanon, the copper of the distant hills, and the precious lapis lazuli from the east. In the centre of this exchange you would find the common citizen, the baker kneading dough in a clay oven, the brewer preparing the thick, nourishing beer that served as a staple of their diet, and the artisan meticulously shaping pottery that would hold the oil of their households. There was a rhythm to this life that felt incredibly modern. They valued stability, family, and the comfort of a well-prepared meal at the end of a long day's work. The social fabric was woven with intricate threads. Even in these ancient times, there were laws protecting the rights of the merchant and the stability of the contract. The market was not just a place for profit, it was the social glue of the city. It was where news from distant lands was shared, where marriages were discussed, and where the culture of the city was constantly evolving. Think of the interior of a traditional Mesopotamian home. The walls were thick to keep out the relentless desert heat, creating a cool, shadowy sanctuary. Outside, the world might be chaotic or demanding, but inside there was the quiet comfort of home. Life was focused on the essentials, the hearth, the family, and the protection of the walls. It is a reminder that regardless of the era, the human need for a safe haven remains constant. As you listen, visualize the warm glow of an oil lamp flickering against the mud brick wall. Outside, the stars are beginning to emerge, mirroring the lamps being lit across the city. The noise of the market fades into the gentle evening breeze, and the city settles into a peaceful repose. The daily labor is done, the trade is balanced, and the world is quiet. Let this sense of domestic peace wash over you, grounding you in the realization that even in the dawn of history, the heartbeat of humanity was centered on the simple, beautiful act of living, connecting, and finding comfort in one another. While the markets hummed with the exchange of goods, a different kind of commerce was happening in the minds of the people, the exchange of stories. Among all the tablets unearthed from the dust, one narrative stands taller than the rest, carved into clay with the weight of eternity. It is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story ever told. Close your eyes and imagine the mighty king, Gilgamesh, ruling over Uruk. He is a man of immense strength and ambition, but he is haunted by the one thing no crown can conquer, the passing of time. When his dearest companion, Enkidu, is taken by the cold hand of fate, Gilgamesh is shattered. He realizes with a clarity that still echoes in our hearts today that he too is mortal. The story takes us on a journey beyond the edges of the known world. We follow Gilgamesh as he wanders across desolate landscapes and crosses the terrifying waters of death, searching for the secret to everlasting life. It is not a story of conquest or war, but a deeply human inward journey. It is a story about the universal fear of losing what we love, and the desperate, beautiful longing to leave something behind that will never fade. Through the tale of Gilgamesh, we learn that the people of Mesopotamia were not just concerned with crops and canals, they were deep philosophers. They wrestled with the same existential questions that keep us awake in the quiet hours of the night. Why are we here? Why must we leave? Is there any part of us that truly endures? The answer they found was not in a magical herb or a divine spell, but in the walls of the city of Uruk itself, the labour of his hands, the stories he inspired, and the legacy he left for his people. They understood that immortality was not a biological state, but a cultural one. By building, by creating, and by sharing our stories, we touch the hem of forever. As you drift further into your rest, let the rhythm of this ancient epic surround you. Feel the quiet exhaustion of the hero as he finally finds peace. The journey is long, but the destination is simple, accepting the cycle of life with grace. The sun sets over the Euphrates, the tablets are stored safely away in the archives, and the story continues to whisper to those who are willing to listen. Everything that was once vibrant is now still, preserved in the gentle, unchanging embrace of history. You are safe, you are resting, and you are part of a story that began at the very dawn of time. As time flowed like the relentless rivers, the small city-states began to dream of larger horizons. From the north a new power emerged, the Akkadians, led by leaders whose names became synonymous with ambition. They sought to weave the separate strands of the Sumerian cities into a single cohesive tapestry. Imagine the shifting winds of change across the plains. It was not just a transition of power, but a blending of civilizations. The Akkadian tongue began to dance with the ancient Sumerian, creating a new, vibrant language that would dominate the region for centuries. This era of consolidation brought a different kind of beauty. It was a time when art, trade, and culture began to travel further than ever before. Roads connected cities that once stood in isolation, and the exchange of ideas accelerated. Think of the craftsmen of this time taking the elegant forms of Sumer and infusing them with a new, bold spirit. They were creating a shared identity, a common language of symbols and customs that stretched from the lush marshes of the south to the rugged foothills of the north. In this grand unfolding history, we see the true nature of civilization. It is not a static monument, but a living, breathing process. It is a constant negotiation between the old and the new, between the local and the universal. The Akkadian period taught the world that unity, while fragile, could create a legacy more enduring than any single city-state. They were pioneers of the concept of an empire, not merely through the strength of arms, but through the strength of administration, communication, and the shared vision of a centralized culture. If you're feeling the gentle pull of sleep, and you find yourself lost in the echoes of these ancient shifting empires, please know that your presence here helps bring this history back to life. If these tales of the cradle of civilization have brought you a sense of peace or wonder, I invite you to share this experience by subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Your engagement acts as a beacon, helping others find their way to this quiet corner of the internet where we honor the stories of the past. Together we are building a library of calm in a loud world. As we move forward, let the imagery of these merging cultures relax your mind. Visualize the vast golden plains being unified under a single starry sky. The friction of change smooths out into the steady, predictable motion of the river currents. There is no conflict in this vision, only the graceful evolution of human society. The world is getting larger, more connected, and yet, in the quiet of your sanctuary, everything is still. The empires are simply shadows on the landscape, and you're drifting through them like a traveller on a boat, floating down the calm, dark waters of the Euphrates, drifting toward a deeper, more peaceful rest. As the echoes of the Akkadian unification settled into the bedrock of history, the stage was set for the rise of one of the most legendary cities ever conceived, Babylon. If Uruk was the birthplace of the city, Babylon became its most refined dream. Imagine walking through its monumental gates, adorned with blue glazed tiles that shimmered like the surface of a deep, tranquil lake under the sun. This was the era of King Hammurabi, a ruler whose name is forever etched in the annals of time, not just for his reach but for his vision of order. Think of the great stone stela placed in the heart of the city, inscribed with laws that sought to bring stability to a complex society. While often remembered for their severity, these laws were, at their core, a testament to a revolutionary idea that society should be governed by clear, predictable rules rather than the unpredictable whims of individuals. It was the birth of the concept that even the powerful must bow to a standard of justice. In the streets of Babylon, life took on a new dimension of elegance. The architecture wasn't just about protection anymore, it was about beauty and scale. The gardens, the temples, and the sprawling palaces were designed to reflect the order of the cosmos. Astronomers became masters of their craft, mapping the heavens with an accuracy that would remain unsurpassed for centuries. They lived in a world where the study of the stars was directly linked to the management of the empire, believing that the celestial bodies held the keys to the health of the land and the prosperity of its people. The atmosphere in Babylon was one of sophisticated calm. It was a place where intellectuals met in the shade of temple courtyards to discuss mathematics, where trade caravans from all corners of the known world met to exchange not just goods, but philosophies, medical knowledge, and poetry. It was a melting pot of human ingenuity. Close your eyes and try to capture the essence of a Babylonian evening. The heat of the day has retreated, leaving the air cool and fragrant with the scent of night-blooming flowers from the royal gardens. You hear the soft, distant sound of a stringed instrument being played, the gentle melody drifting over the mud-brick rooftops. There is a sense of accomplishment in the air, the feeling of a civilization that has mastered its environment, organized its society, and found a moment of profound, lasting equilibrium. You are moving through a world of soft colors, deep knowledge, and the quiet pride of a people who knew they were building something that would outlast their own lifetimes. The pace is slow, the world is stable, and you are simply observing the gentle turning of the pages of a golden age. Throughout the long, rolling centuries of the Mesopotamian experience, one thing remained constant: the resilience of the human spirit. Empires would wax and wane, rulers would rise with the morning sun and set like the evening stars, but the fundamental culture of the people, the way they baked their bread, the way they celebrated the harvest, and the way they looked to the heavens for guidance, persisted. It was a culture woven from threads of clay and water, remarkably durable against the friction of time. Imagine the transition of generations. A grandfather in the late Babylonian era would tell stories to his grandchildren about the ancient heroes of Uruk, just as we look back today. They were a people who understood the value of memory. They cherished their libraries where thousands of clay tablets were meticulously organized, safeguarding the wisdom of law, medicine, and astronomy. They knew that a civilization is only as strong as its ability to pass its knowledge to those who follow. In this deep, rhythmic passage of time, we see the true majesty of Mesopotamia. It wasn't found in the height of the walls or the weight of the gold in the palace treasury. It was found in the quiet persistence of the scholars, the farmers who faithfully tended the canals, and the artists who transformed wet mud into works of enduring beauty. They were architects of the future, even if they didn't know it. If you find that this journey through the cradle of civilization is helping you find your own center, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. By joining our little community, you help us continue these nocturnal explorations of history. A simple like or a thoughtful comment not only helps the channel reach others who might need a moment of tranquility, but also builds a bridge between us, the listeners, and the stories that have shaped our collective human past. Your presence here is the vital spark that keeps these ancient narratives alive and breathing in the present day. As you settle deeper into your rest, visualize the vast quiet landscape of the ancient plains. The fires of the city have burned down to glowing embers. The chatter of the market has long since faded into the silence of the desert night. The rivers flow on, indifferent to the shifting of human borders, constantly renewing the land. You are part of this grand, slow-moving cycle. The anxieties of your own world seem small when viewed against the backdrop of these vast, quiet centuries. Let the stillness of the past wash over you, clearing your mind, preparing your spirit for a deep, restorative and peaceful sleep. You are drifting, anchored by the wisdom of the ages, flowing with the tide of history toward a quiet, undisturbed rest. In the later chapters of this ancient saga, the spotlight turns to the north, to the land of the Assyrians. They were a people who, perhaps more than any other, understood the power of knowledge. Imagine the royal library of Ashurbanipal, a sprawling, quiet sanctuary filled with tens of thousands of clay tablets. While other empires might have been defined solely by their military reach, the Assyrians were defined by their hunger to collect the wisdom of the world. They sent scribes to every corner of the known lands to transcribe the myths, the scientific observations, and the legal codes of the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the Babylonians. Picture yourself walking down the halls of this library. The air is cool and smells faintly of baked clay and old dry dust. There is no sound here except for the occasional scratch of a reed stylus on a fresh tablet. This was not just a collection of information, it was an act of profound reverence. They were curating the soul of civilization. They believed that as long as these words existed, the people who wrote them and the gods they served would never truly perish. This commitment to the written word is perhaps the greatest gift the people of Mesopotamia left to us. When we hold a book today, or when we read a digital screen, we are participating in a tradition that was perfected in these very halls. They taught us that knowledge is the only thing that grows when it is shared, and the only thing that survives the decay of empires. It was an intellectual legacy that bridged the gap between the chaotic, unpredictable river life and the structured, reasoned world of the future. Think of the patience required to etch each character, to bake each tablet, to catalogue each thought. This was a slow, deliberate form of immortality. They didn't have the luxury of instantaneous communication, so they invested in the permanence of the clay. They understood that the physical world is fleeting. Rivers change course, walls crumble, and palaces are reclaimed by the sand. But the ideas we capture, the stories we tell, and the laws we write down, they have the potential to endure. As you lean into the stillness of your surroundings, let this idea take root. You are the beneficiary of this ancient, silent labor. The history they saved is the history that forms the bedrock of our understanding today. The wisdom of those ancient scholars is still echoing in the way we view our own lives, our own society, and our own place in the vast starry cosmos. In your mind, visualize these shelves stretching into the shadows, a quiet repository of human hope, resilience, and curiosity. Everything is in its place. Everything is recorded, The library is closed, the scrolls are safe, and the world is finally completely at peace. This content is inspired by and adapted from public domain works available through Project Gutenberg. The material has been transformed through original narration, editing, and storytelling to create a unique experience for educational and entertainment purposes. Time in the land between the rivers moved like the silt-heavy waters of the Euphrates, slow, constant, and eventually all-encompassing. We must understand that in Mesopotamia, the end of an era was rarely a sudden, violent climax. It was more like the slow fading of light at the end of a long golden day. The great cities, those monuments of human will and ambition, began to breathe in rhythm with the desert that surrounded them. Think of the desert as a vast, patient entity. For centuries, the people of the cities had held back the encroaching sands with their canals, their walls, and their ceaseless labour. But the seasons have their own memory. The rivers, which had once been the source of all life, began to shift their courses, seeking new paths through the plains. Where there was once a thriving canal, there eventually became a dry bed. Where there were once bustling gardens, the wild grasses and the creeping sands began to reclaim their original territory. This was not a tragedy, but a transformation. The people did not simply disappear, they dispersed, their knowledge and their customs flowing into the currents of new cultures and new times. The great high-walled cities, once the beacons of human civilization, were gradually softened by the wind and the rain. The sharp angles of the ziggurats began to round off, turning into hills that looked as if they had been placed there by nature itself. There is a profound beauty in this return to the earth. The clay from which they had built their homes, their temples, and their very laws was simply being returned to the land from which it came. It is a reminder that all our grandest endeavours are part of a larger, silent, and ancient cycle. We build, we love, we trade, and we dream, and then in time we leave behind a landscape that is enriched by our presence. Imagine standing on the site of one of these ancient cities today. The wind whistles through the gaps in the ruins, carrying the scent of dry earth and sage. There are no crowds, no voices of shouting merchants, no clatter of chariots. There is only the vast open silence of the desert sky. It feels like a place that is dreaming of its past. The stars above are the same ones that the ancient astronomers mapped with such care. The night air feels heavy with the weight of 5,000 years of human thought. As you drift closer to the threshold of deep sleep, let your own worries and ambitions feel just as small and as temporary as those ancient city walls. You are part of something much larger than the tasks you must perform tomorrow or the anxieties that cloud your mind today. You are a small, precious thread in a tapestry that has been weaving itself since the beginning of time. Let the history of Mesopotamia, with all its rise and its gentle return to the earth, serve as your anchor. You are safe. You are part of the story. And everything in the end returns to a state of perfect, quiet peace. Though the cities crumbled and the names of the kings grew faint, the spirit of Mesopotamia never truly vanished. It was a fountainhead, an invisible river that flowed beneath the surface of the subsequent empires. Think of the Greek philosophers gazing at the stars, or the mathematicians of the ancient world refining their calculations. They were walking the paths first cleared by the scribes of Uruk and the astronomers of Babylon. The torch of human knowledge was passed, hand to hand, through the darkness of intervening centuries. Consider the melodies of the harps that once played in the royal courts, or the rhythms of the chants that resonated within the ziggurat walls. While the physical music has long since dissolved into the desert air, the scale of our music, the way we perceive harmony and dissonance, still echoes with the structures they first defined. We are not living in a world apart from them. We are living in the expanded, perfected version of their initial blueprints. This is the beauty of our human continuity. Every time we write a letter, every time we measure a field, every time we look at the night sky and seek meaning in the patterns of light, we are performing an ancient ritual. We are participating in a conversation that began 5 millennia ago. The people of the Fertile Crescent were our teachers, even if we have forgotten their names. They were the ones who first dared to imagine that life could be more than just survival, that it could be an art form, a science, and a legacy. Imagine a golden thread connecting your own heartbeat to the heartbeat of a merchant in a market in Nineveh. That thread is the shared experience of being human, the same capacity for wonder, the same fear of the unknown, the same quiet pride in creation. When you close your eyes and drift off tonight, you are not merely falling asleep, you are tapping into this ancient stream of human consciousness, you are resting on the foundation they laid. The world outside your window may seem vastly different, with its steel, its glass, and its frantic pace, but the soul of the world is unchanged. The same stars that watched over the first brick being laid in Eridu are watching over you tonight. They are the same silent, ancient witnesses to our collective progress. Let their light be a comforting, steady presence in your room. Feel the weight of the years not as a burden, but as a soft, comforting blanket of history. Everything that has happened has brought us to this moment of stillness, where the only thing that matters is the rhythm of your own breath, the slow, steady rise and fall of your chest, and the profound, beautiful silence of a world that is finally at rest. You are connected, you are safe, and you are part of an unbroken line of dreamers who have walked this earth since the dawn of time. As we peer into the twilight of the independent Mesopotamian states, we see their influence not vanishing, but expanding. The techniques of governance perfected in the mud-brick palaces of Babylon and the administrative brilliance of the Assyrian records became the blueprint for the empires that followed, most notably the Persians. Imagine a new vast horizon where the legacy of the rivers is carried across the mountains into the heart of the Iranian plateau. The Persians were observant masters. When they stepped into the Fertile Crescent, they did not destroy the machinery of the state, they adopted it. They took the ancient scribal traditions, the intricate systems of land measurement, and the complex irrigation bureaucracies that had been the heartbeat of the Tigris and Euphrates for millennia, and they scaled them up to manage an empire that stretched from the Indus to the Mediterranean. It was a sophisticated evolution of power. They understood that to rule such a diverse world, one needed the administrative bedrock that only the Mesopotamians had spent thousands of years refining. Consider the role of the satrap, the provincial governor. This was not a purely Persian invention, it was an extension of the local city-state management style that had been thriving since the days of Sumer. The idea that a city or a region could function with its own local laws, provided it paid tribute and maintained the infrastructure of the crown, was a direct descendant of the relationship between the central ziggurat and the surrounding fertile farmlands. This era was a fascinating study in cultural synthesis. The art of the time began to show a blending of aesthetics, the robust foundational strength of the Mesopotamian relief carvings meeting the fluid, elegant precision of the Persian artisans. It was a time of immense movement. Roads were paved, trade routes were standardized, and for the first time a traveller could cross vast distances under a single unified administrative umbrella. The chaos of shifting borders was replaced by a deliberate, organized peace. Yet the soul of the region, the ancient quiet wisdom of the rivers, remained the guiding light. Think of the way knowledge travelled along these new grand roads. It wasn't just gold or silk that moved. It was the concepts of justice, the lunar calendars, and the medical texts that had been carefully copied onto thousands of tablets in the great libraries of the past. The Mesopotamian heritage was being woven into the DNA of a new global civilization. As you drift further into this scene, visualize the vast map of the ancient world. See the lines of influence spreading like water through a field of clay, nourishing the growth of something much larger. Everything is in motion, yet it feels perfectly orchestrated. The world is changing, growing more complex, yet beneath it all the rhythm remains the same. The ancient wisdom is not being lost, it is being shared, expanded, and preserved for a future that is yet to arrive. To truly understand how this civilization sustained itself through the turbulent shifts of power and the erosion of time, we must look inside the aduba, the tablet house, or the school of the ancient scribe. Imagine a cool, shaded courtyard in the heart of a city, protected from the relentless desert heat. Here students, mostly sons of the wealthy, but occasionally those of humble beginnings, sat in rows, their laps filled with soft, damp clay, their hands steady as they learned the art of the stylus. Education in Mesopotamia was an exercise in extreme discipline and patience. The Umiya, or the master of the school, was not just a teacher, he was the guardian of the culture's memory. He would recite long passages of wisdom, legal precedents, and epic poetry, and the students would strive to capture every sign and sound into the clay. It was a rhythmic, almost meditative process. Press, push, slide, press, push, slide. 1,000 times a day, 1,000 days in a row, until the cuneiform signs became an extension of their own minds. It is here that we learn of the human struggle for knowledge. We have found ancient tablets containing the complaints of students, venting about the harshness of their masters, the long hours, and the difficulty of the complex script. These echoes of youthful frustration are deeply relatable. They prove that the desire for self-improvement and the challenges of learning are as old as civilization itself. The aduba was the forge of the Mesopotamian intellect. It was where the identity of the society was hammered into shape, generation after generation. Beyond just learning to read and write, these students were being groomed for the administrative machinery of the world. They learned the mathematics needed for complex land surveying, the geometry required to build canals, and the legal language necessary to resolve disputes between neighbours. They were the architects of order. Without them, the empire would have simply been a collection of scattered villages. With them, it became a functioning, resilient state. This system of education provided a unique stability because the script and the curriculum remained largely unchanged for centuries. A scribe from one city could travel hundreds of miles to another and still be able to read the records and understand the laws. They had created a universal language of governance. As you lie here, drifting in the quiet of your room, try to envision that peaceful courtyard. See the young students focusing with such intent, the master pacing slowly behind them, the soft scent of drying mud in the air. Feel the connection between that scene and the way we value learning today. We are all students of the past, whether we realize it or not. The information we consume, the way we structure our days, and the way we document our thoughts, it is all built upon the lessons that began in those ancient schools. The world is quiet now, the tablets have long since been buried and unearthed, but the spirit of that inquiry remains. Let this thought ground you. You are part of a long, noble lineage of those who seek to understand, to document, and to preserve the truth of the world. The lesson is simple, the atmosphere is calm, and the path to rest is open before you. While the scribes were recording the laws of kings in the cool shadow of the aduba, the true heartbeat of Mesopotamia was pulsing in the fields that stretched toward the horizon. To understand this land, one must imagine the sensory experience of the farmer, the grit of the silt between their toes, the smell of the damp earth after the canals were opened, and the shimmering haze of heat that rose from the soil at midday. Their lives were not dictated by the edicts of kings, but by the ancient, rhythmic pulse of the Tigris and the Euphrates. The agricultural life was a high-stakes conversation with the divine. Every season began with the observation of the stars. They knew that when certain constellations appeared on the horizon, the rivers would soon swell with the melting snows from the distant northern mountains. This wasn't just folklore, it was science, born of necessity. Imagine the anticipation in the village as the water level began to rise, a slow, silent surge that brought both danger and salvation. It was a time of communal labour, where entire families would work through the moonlit nights to reinforce the levees and clear the primary channels. There was a profound, almost spiritual stillness in this labour. It was a rhythmic, repetitive existence, planting the seeds in the nutrient-rich silt, weeding the delicate shoots, and finally, the golden haze of the harvest. During the harvest, the fields would come alive with the sound of laughter and the songs of the workers. They believed that by laboring they were honoring the gods of the earth and the water. The grain they produced was more than just food, it was the physical manifestation of divine favor. Consider the complexity of their irrigation technology. It was a landscape engineered by hand, a masterpiece of human cooperation. They had created a massive, interconnected nervous system of water that defied the aridity of the desert. This required a level of social cohesion that is rare in history. Neighbors had to trust neighbors. Village elders had to manage the flow of water with an almost surgical precision to ensure that no one's plot was left dry. It was a society built on the necessity of shared survival. This life was defined by the concept of the cycle. They understood, better than perhaps any modern society, that life is a series of renewals. Winter led to the flood to the planting to the harvest, and the harvest to the feast. There was no beginning, no end, only the turning of the wheel. As you allow yourself to drift into a deeper state of relaxation, visualize this cycle. See the vast fields of green and gold changing with the seasons. Feel the cool water of the canal soothing the parched earth. Everything here is in balance. The exhaustion of a long day's work brings a specific, heavy and satisfying peace, a rest that is well earned. The farmer lays their head down, listening to the distant, steady flow of the river, knowing that tomorrow the cycle will continue and the earth will once again be ready to provide. You are now entering that same state of natural, deep repose. Your own breathing is becoming slow and steady, matching the rhythmic flow of the ancient rivers. The world is quiet, the crops are gathered, and you are drifting into the gentle, undisturbed stillness of the night. When the sun dipped low behind the horizon and the heat of the day began to dissipate, the life of Mesopotamia retreated from the open, sun-drenched squares into the intimacy of the home. Imagine the winding, narrow streets of a city like Ur. These were not wide avenues, but cool, shaded arteries designed to trap the breeze and keep the interior walls of the houses shielded from the relentless sun. The architecture was masterfully simple. Thick walls of sun-dried mud brick, a flat roof for sleeping under the stars, and a central courtyard that acted as the lung of the home. Step inside one of these houses in your mind. The air inside is noticeably cooler, a silent sanctuary of shadows and soft, diffused light. In the centre courtyard, a small hearth glows with the embers of a meal just prepared. You can smell the faint, comforting scent of baked barley bread, and perhaps the roasted aromatics of lentils and chickpeas. This was the true, enduring Mesopotamia, the family table. Here, the grand politics of the kings and the complex calculations of the astronomers mattered less than the immediate, profound reality of shared existence. The home was a place of profound significance. Many families kept the small shrines of their ancestors within these walls, believing that the presence of those who came before continued to watch over the household. They were a people who built their lives on the bedrock of lineage and memory. You can feel the sense of stability. The house, built of the earth itself, was a tangible extension of the land they labored upon. It was an environment that encouraged introspection, rest, and the quiet passing down of stories from parent to child. As the evening deepened, the family would gather on the flat roof of the house. This was the place of dreams and observations. Under the vast, unpolluted canopy of the night sky, they would look up at the same constellations that guided the sailors and the priests. It was on these rooftops that the intimacy of the family met the vastness of the cosmos. It was here that they whispered their hopes, their small fears, and their quiet gratitude for the cooling wind. There is something deeply universal about this image. Despite the 5 millennia that separate us, the human need for a sanctuary, for the warmth of family, and for the peace of a quiet evening remains untouched by the passage of time. As you drift further into the stillness of your own environment, imagine the quiet of that ancient roof. The world is soft, the edges of the day have blurred into the comfort of the night, and there is nowhere else you need to be. The household is at peace, the ancestors are at rest, and you are enveloped in the same gentle embrace of the night. Let the silence of those ancient homes wash over you, clearing the noise of the day from your thoughts, leaving only the calm, steady rhythm of your own presence. Beyond the grand architecture and the expansive irrigation systems, there lived a world of delicate detail, a realm of artisans who gave beauty to the daily life of Mesopotamia. Imagine the workshop of a master gem cutter. The air here is quiet, focused, and punctuated only by the rhythmic scraping of tools against stone. Here the deep blue of lapis lazuli, imported from the distant mountains of the east, meets the warm, translucent glow of carnelian. The most intimate of these creations were the cylinder seals. Think of these as the ancient equivalent of a personal signature, but carved with the mastery of a sculptor. Each seal was a miniature masterpiece, etched in reverse, so that when pressed into soft clay, it would leave a raised, intricate scene, a king offering tribute, a hero battling a mythic beast, or a humble prayer to the gods. These were worn as necklaces or pinned to robes, serving as both a badge of identity and a protective amulet. To hold such a seal is to touch the personal history of a person who lived thousands of years ago. It reflects an obsession with precision that was central to their culture. They believed that by carrying these objects, they brought order to their own lives and invited divine protection upon their affairs. The craftsmanship required to carve such detail into a stone no larger than a human thumb is a testament to the patience and the steady hands of those who worked in the dim light of the workshops. These artisans were the bridge between the material and the spiritual. By carving a divine image onto a seal, they weren't just creating jewelry, they were grounding their faith in something tangible. The process of creation was in itself a form of worship. They understood that the beauty of a stone was a reflection of the beauty of the cosmos, and by shaping it, they were aligning their small human work with the grand eternal patterns of the universe. As you drift into the quiet of your room, let your mind rest on the image of these small, smooth stones. Feel their coolness in your palm. Imagine the pressure of the seal into the clay, a moment of contact that leaves a mark, a memory, a story that can survive the centuries. This is how we too leave our mark on the world. We are artisans of our own experience, carving our intentions, our loves, and our quiet thoughts into the fabric of our days. Everything is slowing down. The intricacy of the world fades into a soft monochromatic blur. The steady, patient work of the ancient artisan becomes the steady, rhythmic pulse of your own breathing. There is no need for hurry, no need for perfection, only the soft, grounding sensation of existence itself. The workshop is silent, the tools are put away, and the seal has made its final impression on the day. You are resting, enveloped in the same quiet stillness that has comforted the restless hearts of humanity since the dawn of civilization. When the sun retreated and the velvet cloak of night descended upon the ziggurats, the atmosphere of Mesopotamia underwent a profound transformation. This was the time for the music of the heart, a soundscape that was as essential to their culture as the irrigation was to their survival. Imagine the interior of a temple chamber, the air thick with the sweet, heavy smoke of burning incense, and the gentle, resonant vibration of a gold-adorned lyre echoing against the thick mud brick walls. The music of the ancients was not designed to be loud or overwhelming. It was designed to harmonize with the human soul. They played melodies that mimicked the slow, steady flow of the rivers, the soft rustling of palm leaves in the night breeze, and the rhythmic cycle of the stars. It was a meditative sound intended to draw the listener into a state of deep, receptive stillness for the priests and the common folk alike. This music was a doorway, a way to step out of the frantic pace of earthly life and into the serene, unchanging presence of the divine. Consider the craft of the musicians. They were not merely entertainers, they were keepers of the sacred rhythms. A single pluck of a string on the lyre was believed to carry a prayer upward, past the rooftops and into the ears of the gods. The drums provided the heartbeat, a deep, resonant thrum that aligned the pulses of those in the room. In that space, there was no division between the past and the present, the mortal and the eternal. They were all participating in a grand, shared symphony of existence. This musical tradition was a testament to their refined emotional intelligence. They understood that human sorrow needed comfort, and that human joy needed a vessel for expression. Their songs were woven with themes of longing, of gratitude, and of the quiet appreciation of life's fleeting beauty. Even today, if you listen closely to the silence of your own mind, you can almost hear the faint, lingering echoes of those ancient melodies, a reminder that the human need for beauty is as old as the ability to create it. As you drift further into your rest, let the phantom sound of a distant lyre wash over you. Visualize the golden light of an oil lamp flickering in the dark, casting long dancing shadows on the walls of the temple. The rhythm of the music is the rhythm of your own breath, slow, deep, and perfectly at peace. Every note is a step away from the noise of your day, a step toward the sanctuary of your own consciousness. The room around you feels soft, expansive, and quiet. The melody is fading, not because it is ending, but because it is becoming part of the stillness. You are sinking deeper into the comfort of the night, cradled by a tradition that has celebrated the beauty of the human spirit for thousands of years. Everything is harmonious, everything is at rest. The world is soft, the night is dark and safe, and you are drifting on a sea of calm, carried by the timeless echoes of a civilization that knew how to find melody in the silence. Beyond the celestial music and the artisan's craft, the heartbeat of Mesopotamian society was its unwavering commitment to the rule of law. It is easy to look back and see only the stern figures of kings and the weight of carved stone, but if we look closer, we find something far more profound, a desperate, beautiful attempt to build a world where the vulnerable were protected by the collective will of the city. Imagine a bustling plaza where a great stone stela stands, accessible to all who can read. This was the public manifestation of a social contract. It was a promise made by the ruler to the people that the whims of the powerful would be checked by the stability of the law. They understood that a city could only flourish if there was a foundation of fairness. When a goafu or an orphan sought redress for a wrong, they did not have to rely on the mercy of a king. They could point to the written word, to the eternal, unchanging truth of the law. This was the birth of civil society. They categorized and codified the complexities of human interaction, trade disputes, property rights, the responsibilities of a craftsman to his patron. By doing so, they elevated the city from a mere collection of individuals into an organized community. They recognized that the most important resource in the land was not the grain in the silos or the water in the canals, but the trust that existed between citizens. There is a quiet dignity in this legal tradition. It reflects a society that valued the idea of the common good. They knew that human nature is prone to conflict, and they sought to channel that energy into constructive, peaceful resolution. The law was, in their eyes, a divine reflection, a way to bring the order of the heavens down to the streets of the earthly city. It was a structure of thought, a logical framework that allowed for the growth of complex institutions, from the temple to the market, from the library to the palace. As you drift into your rest, let the concept of this ancient order surround you. Feel the strength of that foundation. The world outside your room may feel chaotic, fast-paced, and unpredictable, but within this narrative there is a profound underlying stability. The ancient laws remind us that society is a choice to be fair, to be orderly, and to protect the peace of the whole. Let this sense of structural integrity guide your mind toward tranquility. Everything is balanced, the weights are true, the scales are level, and the day's burdens are being settled. You are safe within the framework of a history that learned, long ago, that true power lies in the quiet, consistent application of justice. Your breathing is steady, your thoughts are settling into the calm, predictable rhythm of a well-ordered world. The city is quiet, the laws are upheld, and you are drifting peacefully toward the deepest, most restorative sleep you have known. In the silence of the deep night, the eyes of the Mesopotamians always turned upward. While their hands were tethered to the clay and the silt of the earth, their minds were anchored in the stars. To them the night sky was not a void, but a vast silent scroll written in the language of light. They were the world's first true observers, the keepers of the celestial ledger. Imagine the priest-astronomer on the summit of a ziggurat, the wind cooling his brow as he tracks the slow, rhythmic dance of the planets across the dome of the heavens. They did not see the stars as mere points of light. They saw them as the messengers of order. By meticulously charting the path of the moon, the wandering of the planets, and the return of the seasonal constellations, they were building the first reliable calendar of human history. This was their way of mastering time. They knew that if they could align their lives with the rhythms of the cosmos, if they could understand the movements of the vast universe, they could bring that same harmony down to the city below. Think of the patience required to observe the heavens for generations. One man would start a record, his son would continue it, and his grandson would refine it. They were participating in a long, unbroken chain of inquiry that spanned centuries. They believed that there was a correspondence between the above and the below, that the peace of the state and the health of the harvest were reflected in the balance of the stars. It was a philosophy of profound connection. Nothing happened in isolation. Every motion in the heavens was a whisper of what was to come on the earth. This observation was not rooted in anxiety, but in a deep, abiding curiosity. They found comfort in the predictability of the cosmos. In a world where rivers could flood and empires could shift, the stars were the only constant. They were the divine promise of recurrence. To watch them was to be reminded that everything eventually returns to its place. The sun sets, the stars rotate, the moon wanes, and then, inevitably, everything begins again. It is the ultimate lesson in stability. As you lie here drifting toward the threshold of sleep, imagine yourself looking up at that same ancient sky. The air is clear, the atmosphere is heavy with the stillness of the desert, and the stars are brilliant and steady. Feel that same ancient curiosity softening into a deep sense of trust. You don't need to know what tomorrow holds. You only need to know that, like the stars, you are part of an orderly, beautiful, and eternal cycle. Everything you're feeling, the heaviness in your limbs, the slowing of your thoughts, is just the natural rhythm of the universe settling into place. The celestial map is unfolding, silent and grand above your world. You are safe under the watchful ancient light. The questions of your day are being answered by the simple, rhythmic passage of time. Your breath is deep, your mind is open, and you are drifting smoothly into the vast, calm space of a truly restful night. Beyond the laws of the land and the mechanics of the stars, the Mesopotamians lived within a landscape of stories, a world where the boundary between the mortal and the mythic was thin as a veil. At the center of this world stood the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest story ever whispered into the clay. It was more than a tale of a king. It was a mirror held up to the human soul, reflecting the very things that keep us awake in the quiet hours of the night. Our fear of losing what we love, our desire to leave a mark, and our struggle to accept that our time here is finite. Imagine the storyteller in a flickering torchlight, recounting the journey of Gilgamesh as he crossed the forbidden seas in search of the secret of eternal life. The listeners sat in hushed reverence, for they saw their own journeys in his quest. They understood his grief when he lost his companion Enkidu, and they felt the weight of his realization that immortality was not found in the flesh, but in the walls he built and the stories he left behind. It was a profound early recognition that we live on through our creations and the love we leave in the hearts of others. These myths were the psychological anchor of the region. By dramatizing the great existential questions, they transformed the terrifying uncertainty of life into something that could be processed and understood. They taught their children that to be human is to yearn for something more, yet to find peace in the present. It was a philosophy of acceptance disguised as adventure. They acknowledged that death was the shadow that followed every king and every peasant, yet they filled their days with the richness of art, friendship, and duty. There is a haunting beauty in the way they embraced this reality. They did not retreat from the world because it was temporary. They engaged with it all the more deeply because of its fleeting nature. They understood that the walls of Uruk, built by their own hands, were the real monument to their immortality. Every brick placed, every law written, and every song sung was a defiance against the silence of time. As you drift closer to the deep silent rest, let the echoes of these ancient stories settle in your mind. You are the protagonist of your own unfolding epic. Like the kings and the builders of old, you are also making your way through the world, weaving your own meaning into the fabric of time. The anxieties you feel, the desire to achieve, the need for connection, these are not burdens, they are the marks of a life being fully lived. Everything is slowing down. The great, restless quest of the day is yielding to the gentle gravity of the night. You are not searching for anything tonight. You have already arrived. You are safe. You are grounded. And the weight of your own existence is being lifted as you drift into the calm, rhythmic darkness. The stars above are still turning. The river is still flowing. And the story continues. But for now the pages are quiet. You are resting, enveloped by the wisdom of the ages, moving toward a dreamless, peaceful, and profound stillness. As our exploration of this ancient cradle winds toward a deeper stillness, we find ourselves standing in the silence of the vast open desert. The cities that once roared with the clatter of chariot wheels and the debates of scribes are now reclaimed by the patient dunes. It is a profound, transformative sight. Here, the scale of human endeavour, our grandest monuments, our most complex legal codes, our most ambitious dreams, is dwarfed by the endless, shifting horizon. Yet there is no sadness in this reclamation. Rather, it is a return to a state of perfect grace. The wind which once carried the prayers of temple priests to the heavens now carries only the whisper of sand against stone. It is a sound that signifies the completion of a cycle. Everything that once pulsed with the frenetic energy of life has settled into the deep, grounded peace of the earth. The clay has returned to the soil, the walls have returned to the mound, and the memory of the people has become a part of the landscape itself. In this quiet, we learn the final lesson of the Mesopotamians, the art of letting go. We have spent our time exploring how they built, how they thought, and how they ruled, but the most lasting gift they have left us is the example of their transition. They show us that we do not have to hold on to the weight of our days with such intensity. The river does not struggle to flow, and the stars do not rush to complete their journey. There is a natural, effortless way to exist, a way of being that accepts the movement of time without fighting it. Imagine the desert night under a moon so bright it casts shadows of the ruins upon the earth. The air is cool, crisp, and empty of all distraction. You are no longer required to be an architect of your own future or a chronicler of your own past. In this space you are simply a presence, a witness to the grand, slow breathing of the world, all the pressures of your daily life. The checklists, the deadlines, the quiet anxieties that tick away at the back of your mind, they have no purchase here. They are being smoothed away, layer by layer, by the endless patience of the desert. Let your thoughts follow the path of the drifting sand. See how it settles into the hollows, filling the gaps, bringing everything to a level, tranquil surface. That is what is happening to your mind now. The jagged edges of your concerns are being softened. The noise is receding into the distance, replaced by a profound, heavy and satisfying silence. You are not losing yourself, you are finding your true center, a place of quiet that existed long before any city was built and will remain long after the last wall has faded into the dust. Everything is resting. The sun has long since set. The moon is your silent guardian, and you are cradled by the history of a world that knew how to find peace. Your breath is effortless, your body is heavy and relaxed, and the stillness is complete. You are drifting in a sea of calm, drifting further and further into the deep, undisturbed and beautiful sanctuary of the night. If you were to travel today to the vast arid plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates, you would not see the gleaming ziggurats of old. Instead, you would see tells, great, rounded hills that rise gently from the flat horizon. To the casual observer, they are merely features of the landscape, but to those who know the history, they are the slumbering giants of civilization. Each mound is a layered history of human life, a stack of cities built upon the foundations of those that came before. This is the physical reality of human legacy. We build, we layer, we refine, and we leave behind a foundation for the future to stand upon. Imagine the layers within these mounds. Down in the darkness lie the first homes of the early settlers, above them the sturdy foundations of the great kings, and above that the remnants of scholars, merchants, and artists. They are all stacked together, held in the quiet embrace of the earth. The soil preserves them, acting as a tomb and a vault all at once. This layering is a beautiful metaphor for our own lives. We too are built upon the tells of our past experiences, the lessons we learned in childhood, the challenges we overcame in youth, and the moments of profound wisdom we gained in maturity. These are the layers that form the ground we stand on today. We are not just the person we are at this moment. We are the sum of all our previous chapters, compressed into a single, stable identity. When we look at these mounds, we are reminded that permanence is not about the durability of stone or the height of a wall. True permanence is the continuity of the spirit. Even when the bricks turned to dust, the concepts they developed, the way they counted time, the way they structured their laws, the way they looked for meaning in the stars, continued to propagate. They were architects of the mind, and the structures they built within our collective consciousness have proven to be far more durable than any temple of mud brick. As you settle deeper into your resting space, let the image of the tell bring you a sense of grounding. Your mind is like that mound, stable, rich with history, and deeply rooted in the earth. You do not need to worry about the shifting sands of the world around you, for you have built your own foundation, layer by layer, year by year. You are solid, you are secure. The noise of your day has faded completely into the background, leaving only the steady, quiet rhythm of your own existence. Every muscle in your body is loose, every tension has dissolved, and your mind is clear, like the desert air after a long, cooling night. There is nothing to build tonight, nothing to measure, and nothing to record. You are simply existing in the peace of the present, a peaceful conclusion to a long, rich journey of thought. You are drifting, anchored and calm, carried by the stillness of the ages toward a perfect, undisturbed rest. To truly understand the rhythm of Mesopotamia, we must look to the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They were never static. Over the centuries they snaked across the plains, abandoning old channels and carving new ones, constantly reshaping the map of the world. A city that once stood proudly on the bank of a great river might, a century later, find itself staring out at a dry, abandoned bed, its lifeblood shifted miles to the east or west. This was not a catastrophe, it was the breath of the land. The rivers were the ultimate teachers of impermanence. They taught the people that to thrive, one must be as fluid as the water itself. One must be ready to adapt, to rebuild, and to find new ways to connect with the source of life. The greatest kings were those who understood this, who did not fight the river's path, but worked to guide its bounty, building the great canal networks that allowed civilization to pulse through the desert. Think of your own life in terms of these rivers. We are often caught up in the desire for things to remain the same, for our circumstances to stay fixed, for our comfort to be undisturbed. But life, like the Euphrates, is meant to flow. Change is not an ending, it is the very mechanism of our growth. When a path closes, another opens. When an old way of doing things is no longer viable, we are invited to carve a new channel, to explore a new field, and to bring life to a different stretch of the landscape. There is a profound, quiet strength in this acceptance of change. It allows us to let go of the rigid structures we build in our minds, the worries about what was, and the anxieties about what might be. We become observers of our own flow, navigating the twists and turns with grace rather than resistance. The water does not fret about its destination, it simply moves, nourishing everything it touches along the way. As you drift here, in the deepening quiet of your room, let your own internal landscape become fluid. Release the need to control the direction of your thoughts. Let your mind drift like the slow, silt-heavy waters moving toward the sea. There is a gentle, natural momentum carrying you forward, away from the dry, barren banks of your daily stress, and into the fertile, cool calm of rest. You are being carried by the river of time, safe and supported by the currents of history that have flowed before you. Every breath is a ripple in this deep, peaceful stream. The world around you is softening, the edges are blurring, and the only thing that remains is the slow, steady movement of your own inner life. You are perfectly in sync with the flow of existence. There is no resistance, no effort, no sound. Only the profound, beautiful stillness of water finding its natural course toward the sea of deep sleep. There is something hauntingly beautiful about the silence of a library that has been buried by time. Imagine the royal library of Nineveh, where the king Ashurbanipal gathered the sum of all human knowledge on tablets of clay. For centuries, these words, the epics, the astronomical observations, the medical spells, and the royal letters rested in a profound earthbound slumber. They were not forgotten, they were simply waiting. The desert protected them in its own way, sealing them away from the chaos of passing empires, keeping them in a state of suspended animation. When the excavators finally broke the seals of the earth and brought these tablets back into the light, it was as if a voice that had been held for 3 millennia suddenly began to speak again. This is the miracle of the written word. It is a bridge that transcends the physical limitations of our bodies. A scribe in the 7th century BC could reach across the vast expanse of time to touch the mind of a researcher in the modern age. It is a testament to the idea that our thoughts, once captured, become a permanent part of the human experience. Consider the dedication required to curate such a collection. Ashurbanipal did not just want to hoard power, he wanted to hoard understanding. He sought to preserve the wisdom of the past so that the future would not have to start from nothing. This is the foundational instinct of civilization, the desire to say, I was here, I thought these things, and I want you to know them. It is an act of supreme optimism. Even in the face of inevitable collapse, they believed that knowledge was worth saving. As you lie here drifting toward the boundary of consciousness, think of your own life as a series of stories. Every choice you have made, every lesson you have learned is a word etched into the clay of your own history. You do not need to worry if you will be remembered or if your efforts will be seen by others. It is enough that they were written. It is enough that they happened. Your experiences are part of the vast expanding library of human existence. Feel the weight of this history beneath you, supporting you like the cool, firm earth of the library floor. There is a deep, resonant peace in knowing that you are part of a continuous narrative. You are the current chapter, and you are being held by the wisdom of all the chapters that came before. Let the silence of those buried tablets flow into your mind, smoothing away the static of your day, replacing it with the calm, ordered quiet of a space designed for reflection. Everything is settling. The world of action, of noise, and of constant demand is falling away, leaving only the tranquil, enduring strength of your own soul. You are safe in the dark, you are preserved in the stillness, and you are drifting further into the vast protective library of sleep. The lamps are extinguished, the silence is complete, and you are finally perfectly at rest. As the velvet curtain of the night falls fully across the plains, the cities of Mesopotamia begin to exhale. The frantic industry of the marketplace, the clatter of the coppersmiths, and the tireless arguments of the law courts dissolve into a pervasive, hallowed hush. It is the time for the closing of the gates, not just the physical gates of the city walls, but the metaphorical gates of the mind. Imagine the master of a household walking through his home, extinguishing the oil lamps one by one, watching as the shadows grow long and soft, eventually merging into a singular comforting darkness. This was a sacred act for them. Sleep was not merely a biological necessity, it was a transition into the realm where the boundaries between the human and the divine became porous. Before lying down on their woven mats, they would often perform a small personal ritual, a prayer whispered into the stillness, a gaze directed toward the constellations that presided over their city. They were entrusting their existence to the gods of the night, seeking protection for their families, their livestock, and the delicate irrigation channels that fed their fields. It was an act of profound surrender. They understood that they had done all they could for the day. They had ploughed, they had written, they had traded, and they had negotiated. Now it was time to let the earth hold them. The ground beneath their sleeping mats was the same earth they had worked upon since dawn, the cold, firm, and reliable mud brick that grounded them in reality. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from this connection, a sense that you are physically held by the very place that sustains you. As you allow yourself to sink into this same state of surrender, visualize that home of old. The hearth is now a pile of glowing, pulsing embers, casting a warm orange warmth against the cool night air. The roof above you is open to the vast, star-dusted sky. There is nothing left to solve. The problems that occupied your mind at noon have lost their sharp edges. They are now just distant echoes, muffled by the depth of the night. You are not responsible for the turning of the world tonight. That task has been taken over by the stars and the slow, inexorable pull of the earth. Let your breathing deepen. Feel the weight of your body pressing into your bed, grounding you just as the mud brick foundations anchored the homes of Uruk. The air is cool, the silence is heavy, and the peace is absolute. You are part of an ancient, unbroken lineage of those who have laid down their heads at the end of a long day. Trusting that the world would still be there when they woke, you are safe, you are held. The night is a sanctuary, and you are drifting into the quiet heart of the dark, where rest is the only truth that remains. If you stand long enough in the silence of the Mesopotamian plains, you begin to perceive a different scale of time. It is not the time of the clock or the calendar, but the time of the earth itself, vast, slow, and indifferent to the hurried pace of our daily lives. 5 millennia have passed since the first scribes pressed their reeds into clay, yet in the landscape of the Fertile Crescent that span of time is but a fleeting moment, a single breath in the long, measured respiration of history. Think of all the lives that have unfolded here, the kings who sought eternal glory, the merchants who worried over the price of grain, the mothers who hushed their children to sleep in the cool of the courtyard, and the astronomers who traced the path of Venus. They have all passed, just as the clouds pass over the desert. They were all once the centre of their own worlds, and now they have returned to the silence of the dust. There is a deep, liberating humility in this realization. Our personal anxieties, our need to be noticed, our small struggles for control, they are so incredibly light in the face of such deep time. This perspective is not meant to diminish our worth, but to offer us a profound sense of relief. You are not required to hold the world together. You are not responsible for the entirety of history. You are merely one thread in a grand, intricate tapestry that has been weaving itself since the dawn of civilization. When you feel the weight of your own responsibilities, remember the kings who have turned to soil. When you feel the sharpness of your own worries, remember the scholars who spent their lives writing on clay that would eventually be buried. Their concerns have dissolved, and so too will yours. In this moment, let that realization wash over you like a cooling breeze at twilight. There is no need to grasp at the present or fear the future. Everything is moving exactly as it should. The cycle of the river, the rotation of the stars, and the ebb and flow of human life, it is all balanced. You are safe in this cycle. You are a natural part of this ancient, rhythmic existence. As you continue to drift, let go of the last few remnants of yourself that are still trying to work, to plan, or to think. Allow your mind to become as vast and as quiet as the desert night. The individual names of those who lived and died in Uruk or Babylon are gone, but the spirit of their lives, the curiosity, the love, the resilience remains embedded in the very air you breathe. you are breathing in the legacy of 5,000 years of human peace. Your heartbeat is slowing to match the pulse of the earth. Your thoughts are becoming sparse, light, and easy to release. There is no sound left, no movement left, only the deep, resonant stillness of a world that has been resting for an eternity. You are sinking into that same ancient, beautiful peace. You are home, you are resting, you are completely and utterly at one with the stillness of the ages. As we reach the final quiet of our journey, let us look back one last time at the people of the two rivers. What remains of them is not just the stone, the clay, or the ruins of their great walls. What remains is the reflection of our own souls. In the scribbled complaint of a student, in the delicate carving of a seal, in the anxious prayer of a father for his children, we see ourselves. They were just as we are, dreamers in a vast world, seeking to carve out a space of safety, warmth, and meaning in the fleeting time they were given. They teach us that the human story is at its heart a story of connection. Every act they performed, the building of a canal, the baking of a loaf, the writing of a law, was an act of reaching out, of saying, "I'm here, and we are in this together." Despite the thousands of years that have eroded their names and their languages, the essential rhythm of their lives beats within us still. The same desire to understand the world, the same need to find beauty in the chaos, the same search for a lasting peace, these are the inheritances that bind us to them across the abyss of time. There is no longer a distance between you and that ancient world. You are not observing history, you are experiencing it. You are the latest page in a story that began when the first fire was lit and the first city gate was closed, and just like those who laid down to rest beneath the same stars, you have fulfilled your purpose for today. You have played your part in the unfolding of the world. You have carried your thoughts, your efforts, and your dreams. Now it is time to lay them down. Imagine yourself now, resting in the cool, shaded courtyard of a house in ancient Ur. The work is done, the city is silent, the fires have been banked, and the stars have begun their slow, nocturnal rotation across the sky. You feel the cool, firm surface of the earth beneath you, a grounding force that has supported humanity since the beginning of time. Your breath is steady, a quiet, rhythmic tide that ebbs and flows in perfect harmony with the night. Let the last remnants of the day fall away like dry leaves. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to strive for. The vast, beautiful history of mankind is looking after itself. The cycle continues, the world turns, and you are free to sink into the deep, dark, and protective embrace of sleep. Your mind is quiet, your spirit is light, and you are drifting further into the vast, silent, and ancient peace. The night is yours. Rest now in the cradle of the ages, knowing that all is well, all is quiet, and all is at rest. The rise of Uruk in the 4th millennium BCE serves as the primal architecture of the human urban experience, marking an irreversible transition from simple pastoral existence to the complex stratified machinery of the city-state. At the heart of this metamorphosis lay a revolutionary reconfiguration of the landscape, the ruling elite of Uruk, positioning themselves as the terrestrial deputies of the gods, seized control of the vital hydraulic systems. By meticulously engineering the flow of the Euphrates, they did more than just water the crops. They captured the very power of nature, transforming a volatile desert flood into a reliable, predictable engine of agricultural surplus. This shift necessitated a new kind of social contract, one that traded the nomadic freedom of the previous millennia for the security, hierarchy, and demands of the urban dweller. As this surplus grew, so too did the necessity for an unprecedented administrative apparatus. It was here, amidst the need to account for grain, livestock, and labour, that the human mind achieved its most enduring triumph, the invention of cuneiform. What began as rudimentary clay tokens and primitive signs for inventory evolved into a sophisticated system of script, effectively the first external memory of the species. This was the birth of the bureaucratic state, where power was no longer just the product of physical strength, but of information management. The priesthood and the administrative class became the architects of order, institutionalizing the roles of citizen, laborer, and elite. Yet this high-functioning social machine came with an inherent tension, the very centralization that allowed for monumental ziggurats and grand artistic expression also entrenched a rigid, top-down hierarchy. The individual became an extension of the state, their labor recorded, their rations measured, and their place in the hierarchy codified. Uruk became the archetype of the imperial city, a brilliant, fragile, and highly organized entity that proved humanity could conquer the elements, provided it was willing to accept the totalizing influence of the state. This environment created a unique political culture. The city was not just a collection of homes, it was a sacred entity, a living creature defined by its walls and its deity. Conflict arose not only from competition for fertile silt, but from the need to secure the trade routes that fed the city's appetite for prestige goods, copper from the mountains, timber from the distant forests, and lapis lazuli from the east. This economic necessity effectively forced the city-states of Sumer into a web of interdependence and rivalry, the precursor to the modern geopolitical dance. By documenting every transaction, every law, and every royal decree, Uruk established the fundamental struggle between the autonomy of the individual and the gravitational pull of the centralized power core, a template that would be debated, refined, and fought over for the next 3 millennia of Mesopotamian history. Following the zenith of the Sumerian city-states, the Mesopotamian landscape entered a period of volatile fragmentation. For centuries, cities like Ur, Lagash, and Kish had existed as independent sovereigns, their identities defined by their own patron deities and localized political interests. However, this decentralized autonomy, while culturally rich, created a state of perpetual attrition. Constant border skirmishes over water rights and agricultural fields left the region exhausted, ripe for a force that could impose a singular will upon the disparate territories. Enter Sargon of Akkad, a figure shrouded in both legend and historical reality, whose rise to power marked the most radical paradigm shift in the history of the ancient world, the transition from the city-state to the territorial empire. Sargon's ascent was not the traditional succession of a local king. It was a military and political revolution. Rising from the position of a cupbearer to the king of Kish, he seized power and launched a campaign of unprecedented ambition. Unlike his predecessors, who sought only to dominate their immediate neighbors, Sargon aimed for total dominance of the Mesopotamian plain. His military success was rooted in a fundamental tactical innovation, the creation of a professional standing army. By moving away from the seasonal farmer-soldier model, he ensured that his power was not tethered to the harvest cycle, allowing him to campaign year-round and project force with a speed and efficiency his rivals could not match. The core of Sargon's strategy, however, was not just in winning battles, but in how he managed the aftermath. He understood that a conquest was meaningless if the conquered maintained their old loyalties. Thus, he systematically dismantled the walls of the cities he took, a profoundly symbolic and practical act that neutralized the ability of local elites to revolt. He replaced the traditional hereditary governors with loyal Akkadian administrators, weaving his own men into the fabric of every conquered city. This was the birth of imperial bureaucracy, a system that standardized weights, measures, and taxation across a vast geography, creating a cohesive, if coerced, economic bloc. Yet Sargon's empire was a delicate experiment. The tension between the Akkadian center and the subjugated Sumerian periphery created a persistent undercurrent of rebellion. The Sumerians, possessing a more established cultural and administrative history, often viewed the Akkadians as northern interlopers. Sargon had to act as both a warrior and a balancer, adopting the religious titles of the Sumerian kings while imposing the Akkadian language as the new lingua franca of administration. This cultural synthesis was a stroke of political genius, but it also highlighted the central paradox of empire. It could be forged in the fire of conquest, but it could only be sustained through the difficult, often bloody process of cultural and political integration. Sargon proved that the geography of the Fertile Crescent could be united, but his life and reign demonstrated that the true challenge was not conquering the land, but holding the hearts and minds of a people who still dreamt of their own local sovereignty. The Akkadian Empire, for all its revolutionary structure and military prowess, carried within its veins a fatal vulnerability: its absolute dependence on a stable environmental and economic foundation. By the reign of Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, the empire had expanded to the limits of the known world, but the very mechanisms of control that sustained such growth were now beginning to strain under unseen pressures. History, often written in the ink of royal decrees, is frequently shaped by the silent, inexorable shifts of the earth itself. Paleoclimatological evidence suggests that around 2200 BCE, the Fertile Crescent was struck by a severe and prolonged aridification event, a megadrought that decimated agricultural yields in the northern rain-fed heartlands, which served as the empire's breadbasket. In the Mesopotamian worldview, the king was the mediator between the divine and the terrestrial. His authority was directly linked to his ability to ensure the prosperity of the land. When the soil turned to dust and the canals withered, the theological contract between the monarch and his subjects was breached. Naram-Sin attempted to solidify his rule by claiming divine status for himself, a radical act intended to transcend the political failures of his reign. But this only deepened the alienation of the traditional priesthood and the regional elites. The drought did not just starve the population, it dismantled the bureaucratic logic that justified the empire's existence. When the state could no longer provide the grain rations that fueled the urban centres, the central authority essentially evaporated. As the centre weakened, the peripheral regions, long simmering with resentment toward their Akkadian overlords, began to break away. From the harsh, rugged mountains of the Zagros to the east, the Guti tribes, a semi-nomadic, fierce and loosely organized people, sensed the fragility of the imperial apparatus. They were not an invading army in the conventional sense, but a force of nature exploiting the systemic disintegration of the Akkadian state. Their incursions were the final blow to an empire already cannibalizing itself from within. The administrative networks that once moved taxes and messages across the empire now failed to transmit anything but the news of total collapse. The fall of Akkad serves as a stark warning on the dangers of over-centralization in the face of ecological instability. The empire had become a complex high-tech superstructure built upon a brittle foundation. When the environment shifted, the state lacked the flexibility to adapt. Yet, as the imperial capital crumbled and the Akkadian name faded into memory, the legacy of their administration did not disappear. It left behind a structural ghost, a blueprint of what a unified Mesopotamia could look like, which would later inspire the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance and the subsequent rise of Babylon. The death of the empire was not a tragedy of human effort, but a reminder that civilization exists only within the grace of the natural world, and that the greatest powers are often undone by the very environment they sought to master. Following the chaotic dissolution of the Akkadian Empire and the subsequent period of insecurity under the Guti, the southern Mesopotamian heartland experienced a remarkable resurgence. The third dynasty of or Ur III, emerged not merely as a restoration of old Sumerian power, but as a deliberate and unprecedented exercise in state engineering. This period is often characterized as the Sumerian Renaissance, a time when the rulers of sought to synthesize the imperial scope of their Akkadian predecessors with the deep-rooted cultural traditions of Sumer. However, the true innovation of III was not military, it was administrative. The kings of transformed the state into what modern scholars often describe as the world's first truly totalitarian bureaucracy. Under the reign of Ur-Nummu and his successors, the state achieved a level of centralized control that was unparalleled in the ancient world. Every aspect of economic life, from the sowing of seeds in the communal fields to the production of textiles in massive state-run workshops, was documented with meticulous precision. Thousands of clay tablets from this era survive as a testament to this obsession with order. They record the precise allocation of grain rations, the movement of livestock, and the daily output of labourers. It was as if the entire nation had been converted into a single vast economic enterprise, with the king at its centre as the supreme accountant of the divine will. This administrative perfection was reinforced by a monumental architectural program. The great ziggurat of a soaring structure of mud brick and bitumen, served as the physical anchor of this state-mandated order. It was a visible manifestation of the social contract. The king provided order, justice, and the appeasement of the gods, and in exchange the people provided their labour and their compliance. Namu also promulgated one of the earliest known law codes, a document that sought to replace the arbitrary will of local lords with a standardized, written system of justice. It was a sophisticated attempt to bind a diverse and restless population into a unified society through the rule of law. Yet this bureaucratic perfection carried its own dangers. The sheer weight of the administrative apparatus required to manage such a complex system was immense, creating a rigid structure that struggled to handle external pressures. As the state became more focused on internal accounting and the preservation of its idealized classic past, it inadvertently became less adaptable to the shifting dynamics of the periphery. The Amorite tribes, pastoralists from the western deserts, began to infiltrate the region, sensing that while the state was efficiently organized, its ability to project military power beyond its core was diminishing. The Year 3 period serves as a profound historical lesson. The pursuit of total control, while creating a golden age of stability and cultural flourishing, can lead to a hardening of the state, a rigid structure that, much like the mud bricks of its ziggurats, may appear indestructible until it is struck at its weakest point. By the end of the 21st century BCE, the rigid perfection of the Year 3 bureaucratic machine began to show cracks that no amount of record-keeping could repair. The state had become a victim of its own efficiency, a centralized monolith that struggled to respond to the fluidity of human movement on its borders. The primary catalyst for this unraveling was the persistent and steady infiltration of the Amorites. Unlike the invading Guti, who had arrived as a destructive wave, the Amorites were a pastoral people who slowly seeped into the Mesopotamian landscape. They were nomads from the western deserts, driven by climatic shifts and a need for grazing land, and they began to settle in the interstitial spaces between the great Sumerian cities, slowly altering the demographic and cultural fabric of the region. As the central government in focused on maintaining the complex tax collection and rationing systems of its heartland, it failed to integrate or repel these newcomers. The Amorite presence disrupted the state's monopoly on land and labour, leading to widespread food shortages and economic hyperinflation. Historical records from the final years of describe a landscape plagued by famine and political paralysis, where the king's authority extended little further than the shadow of the capital's walls. The bureaucracy, once the pride of the Sumerian Renaissance, became a hollow shell. Officials continued to archive the inventory of empty granaries, and tax collectors demanded tribute from lands that had already been abandoned. The ultimate collapse was swift and traumatic. In a final, desperate attempt to hold the crumbling state together, the last king of Ibbi-Sin, watched as his provincial governors declared independence one by one. The death knell sounded when the Elamites, traditional rivals from the mountains to the east, exploited the internal weakness and struck the heart of the empire. The seat of administrative perfection, was sacked, and its patron deity Nana was carried away into captivity. This was not just a political defeat, it was a profound ontological crisis. The collapse of was seen as the abandonment of the gods, a theme captured in the haunting lament for a piece of literature that articulated the collective grief of a civilization that had believed its order was eternal. From the ashes of this collapse, the map of Mesopotamia was irrevocably altered. The era of the unified empire gave way to a chaotic mosaic of smaller kingdoms, each led by local warlords, many of whom were of Amorite descent. This was the Isin-Larsa period, a time of constant warfare, shifting alliances and diplomatic maneuvering. It was in this crucible of instability that a modest, formerly insignificant settlement on the banks of the Euphrates, a place known as Bab-Ilim, or the Gate of the Gods, began to consolidate its power. Babylon was then but a small town, yet it possessed a strategic location and, more importantly, a leadership that understood that the old ways of the centralized Sumerian state were dead. The future would not belong to the static bureaucracies of the past, but to those who could navigate the volatile competitive politics of the new age. As the dust settled on the ruins of Mesopotamia entered a period of intense geopolitical flux known as the Old Babylonian period. The region was a patchwork of competing Amorite kingdoms, Isin, Larsa, Eshnunna, and Mari, all vying for control of the life-giving rivers. Amidst this predatory landscape, Babylon, a relatively minor city-state, began its ascent. Its rise was not the result of sudden conquest, but of a calculated multi-generational strategy of consolidation. When Hammurabi ascended to the throne in 1792 BCE, he inherited a state that was perfectly positioned to exploit the weaknesses of its neighbors. Hammurabi was a master of the long game. He spent the first decades of his reign strengthening his domestic infrastructure, refining his administration, and forging diplomatic alliances that allowed him to isolate his enemies one by one. Hammurabi's strategy was defined by a ruthless pragmatism. He would often ally with a stronger city to crush a rival, only to turn on his former ally once their utility had expired. Through a series of brilliant military campaigns, he dismantled the kingdoms of Larsa and Mari, effectively unifying the entire Mesopotamian plain under a single Babylonian hegemony. Yet Hammurabi understood that an empire built solely on the sword would be as ephemeral as the ones that preceded it. To ensure the longevity of his rule, he needed to provide something that the Sumerian and Akkadian kings had lacked: a transparent, standardized, and divinely sanctioned system of justice. The result was the famous Code of Hammurabi, a monumental stele of black basalt that served as a public declaration of the law. By inscribing these regulations, Hammurabi shifted the source of justice from the arbitrary whims of local judges to a unified centralized code. The code touched upon every aspect of social life, from agricultural contracts and divorce settlements to the famous principle of lex talionis, the law of retaliation or an eye for an eye. While modern eyes may see these punishments as brutal, for the ancient Mesopotamian it was a revolution. It created a predictable social order, protecting the weak from the strong, and most importantly, it established the king as the ultimate protector of his people. Babylon thus became more than just a capital city. It became the intellectual and legal heart of the Near East. Hammurabi's administration integrated the Sumerian and Akkadian traditions into a new Babylonian identity, a process that solidified the city's status as a center of culture and trade for centuries to come. His reign demonstrated that the stability of an empire depends on the legitimacy of its institutions. By codifying the law, he tied the fate of the state to the lives of its citizens, creating a psychological bond that survived even after his own death. The era of the fragmented warlord had passed, the era of the legalistic state had begun, and Babylon stood at the center of this new sophisticated world order. The genius of Hammurabi lay in his ability to weave a fragmented region into a coherent legal and political entity, yet the empire he forged was structurally tethered to his personal vision and the strength of his administration. Following his death, the Babylonian state began to face the classic dilemma of all Mesopotamian powers: how to defend a fertile, prosperous core against the relentless movement of tribal populations driven by climate and opportunity. The successors of Hammurabi inherited not only the glory of his conquests, but also the logistical nightmare of maintaining order across a vast, ethnically diverse territory. The centralized system, once a source of stability, began to show signs of administrative fatigue as the royal authority struggled to keep pace with the shifting loyalties of provincial governors. The primary threats to this order came from the fringes of the civilized world. To the northeast, in the rugged terrain of the Zagros Mountains, the Kassites, a people of uncertain origin, had been slowly infiltrating the Babylonian periphery. Initially working as laborers and mercenaries, they gradually gained political influence and territorial footholds, waiting for the right moment to strike at the center. More dramatic, however, was the rise of the Hittites in Anatolia. Developing advanced metallurgical techniques and a military doctrine based on the superior mobility of the light, horse-drawn chariot, the Hittites represented a shift in the nature of ancient warfare. They were no longer merely regional rivals. They were a technologically distinct power, with ambitions that extended far beyond their mountain strongholds. In 1595 BCE, the catastrophe arrived. The Hittite king Mursili I, seeking to expand his influence and seize the wealth of the Mesopotamian plains, launched a lightning-fast military raid. Moving with a speed that the static Babylonian defences could not counter, the Hittite army descended into the heart of the empire. Babylon, the gate of the gods, was sacked. The devastation was absolute. The city was looted, the royal treasures were carried off, and the sacred statue of Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, was seized, a symbolic act that signaled the utter humiliation of the city. The fall of Babylon was more than a military defeat. It was a profound trauma for the Mesopotamian consciousness. It proved that even a state built upon the bedrock of law and administrative tradition was vulnerable to the kinetic energy of external invaders. In the power vacuum left by the retreating Hittites, the Kassites seized control, establishing a dynasty that would rule over Babylon for centuries. Yet this was not the end of the Babylonian identity. Instead, it marked a period of cultural synthesis. The Kassites, though outsiders, adopted the Babylonian language, religion, and legal traditions, effectively becoming Babylonian to legitimize their rule. This era underscores a pivotal lesson in historical continuity. While cities may be sacked and empires may fall, the cultural gravitational pull of a center like Babylon is so profound that even its conquerors are eventually consumed by the very legacy they sought to destroy. Following the shock of the Hittite raid and the subsequent Kassite takeover, Babylon did not descend into permanent darkness. Instead, it entered a long, surprisingly stable, and intellectually vibrant period known as the Kassite era. For nearly 400 years, the Kassite kings navigated the complex geopolitics of the Late Bronze Age, a time when Mesopotamia was no longer an isolated player, but one node in an interconnected world of competing great powers. This was the dawn of the first truly globalized order, a period famously captured in the Amarna letters, a cache of diplomatic correspondence that reveals a sophisticated web of political marriages, gift exchanges, and formal treaties between the kings of Babylon, Egypt, the Hittites, and the rising power of Assyria. The Kassites, once perceived as mere mountain invaders, proved to be remarkable curators of Babylonian culture. They adopted the Sumerian Akkadian literary canon, revitalized the temples, and oversaw a period of sustained urban development. In the eyes of the Kassite monarchs, to be a king of Babylon was to be a guardian of the most prestigious legacy in the Near East. They maintained the legal foundations laid by Hammurabi, ensuring that the state functioned with a predictable, orderly rhythm. This stability was vital, as Babylon became a premier center for scholarship, particularly in the fields of mathematics, astronomy, and divination. The stars, once seen merely as omens, were being tracked with increasing precision, laying the early groundwork for the scientific understanding of the heavens that would later bloom in the Neo-Babylonian period. This era was defined by a delicate balance of power, a club of great powers, where conflicts were often managed through diplomacy rather than total war. The kings addressed one another as brother, and the diplomatic vocabulary of the time focused on the concept of kinatu, or truth, stability, in their alliances. However, this stability was fragile. The international order relied on the health of trade routes and the mutual respect of sovereign monarchs. Beneath the surface of these grand diplomatic gestures, the geopolitical landscape was shifting. Assyria, situated in the northern reaches of the Tigris, was beginning to transform from a regional vassal into an aggressive, militarized state, sensing that the old Kassite equilibrium was becoming brittle. As the Kassite era matured, the administrative burden of maintaining these complex international relationships became increasingly costly. The Babylonian state remained a cultural lighthouse, but its military and economic edge began to dull. While they excelled in the soft power of diplomacy and scholarship, the hard power of the region was migrating elsewhere. The history of the Kassite period teaches us that even the most successful diplomatic systems are eventually undermined by the slow, relentless pressure of rising military powers. The balance of power, once so carefully negotiated, was beginning to tip, setting the stage for the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a force that would discard the language of brotherhood in favor of the language of conquest. As the delicate diplomatic equilibrium of the Kassite era faded, the center of gravity in the Near East shifted violently toward the north. Situated along the middle Tigris, the Assyrians had long lived in the shadow of their southern neighbors, forced to endure the shifting tides of Babylonian and Mitanni dominance. However, out of this state of perpetual survival emerged a culture forged in iron and hardened by constant conflict. By the 9th century BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire began a relentless march of expansion, creating a state that would redefine the very nature of imperial power. Unlike the Babylonians, who sought to rule through legalism and cultural assimilation, the Assyrians projected authority through the systematic application of absolute, unmitigated force. The Neo-Assyrian state was, in every sense, a total military institution. Every facet of its social and economic life was subordinated to the requirements of the army. They were the first to implement a professional, standing military force on a massive scale, supported by a sophisticated logistics network that could keep legions in the field across vast distances. Their tactical innovations were terrifyingly effective. They perfected the use of the iron-tipped composite bow, introduced high-mobility chariot corps, and pioneered the use of brutal siege engines, battering rams and mobile towers that made the supposedly impregnable city walls of the ancient world crumble like dried mud. For an Assyrian king, a walled city was not an obstacle, but a challenge to be conquered, dismantled, and absorbed. However, the true mastery of the Assyrian Empire lay in its use of psychological warfare. The state policy was explicitly built upon the deliberate cultivation of fear. Royal inscriptions carved in stone for all to see boasted of the calculated cruelty inflicted upon those who dared to resist, the mass deportations of entire populations, the systematic destruction of cities, and the public displays of defeated leaders. This was not senseless violence, it was a calibrated strategy designed to shatter the will of potential rebels before a single spear was thrown. By creating a reputation for absolute devastation, the Assyrians sought to minimize the need for constant, costly battles, forcing submission through the sheer terror of their name. Yet this system of rule, the Iron Fist, created a permanent state of tension. The empire was held together not by the consent of the governed, but by the threat of reprisal. This necessitated a permanent and expanding military footprint, creating an imperial structure that required constant conquest to pay for its own existence. The Assyrian administrative model was one of the most efficient in history, featuring a network of provinces, provincial governors, and an elaborate system of royal messengers that allowed the king to monitor the far reaches of his domain. But underneath this veneer of control, the empire was a house of cards, constantly strained by the hatred of the peoples it occupied. As they built their grand palaces in Nineveh, filling them with the plundered wealth of the civilized world, the Assyrians were unknowingly creating an internal pressure that would eventually reach the breaking point. They had proven that a state could be ruled by fear, but they would soon discover that a state ruled by fear can never truly be at peace. At the height of the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire reached its geographical and cultural zenith under the reign of Ashurbanipal. While his predecessors had focused primarily on the expansion of borders and the refinement of the military machine, Ashurbanipal cultivated a different legacy. He was, uniquely among the martial kings of his lineage, a scholar king. Driven by a profound obsession with the past, he ordered his scribes to scour every corner of Mesopotamia to find, copy, and archive the sum of human knowledge. The result was the Great Library of Nineveh, a monumental repository containing thousands of clay tablets. Within its walls, the Epic of Gilgamesh, complex astronomical tables, medical treatises, and long-lost incantations were preserved, safeguarding the intellectual heritage of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon for future generations. This endeavour was more than a mere curiosity. It was a desperate attempt to legitimize Assyrian rule by anchoring it in the deep, sacred history of the region. By gathering the voices of the past, Ashurbanipal sought to position Nineveh not just as a city of conquerors, but as the rightful heir to the long-storied tradition of Mesopotamian civilization. However, this intellectual pursuit stood in stark contrast to the brutal reality of his reign. The empire remained a monolith built on military compulsion. Ashurbanipal's campaigns in Elam and Egypt were as ruthless as those of his ancestors, characterized by the same systematic destruction and mass deportation that had become the hallmark of Assyrian policy. The paradox of the age was complete. The same king who meticulously catalogued the wisdom of the ancients was also the one who oversaw the erasure of rival cultures. Behind the facade of Nineveh's grandeur, however, the structure of the empire was buckling under the weight of its own success. The sheer scale of the Neo-Assyrian reach had made administration a logistical nightmare. To govern territories spanning from the Nile to the Persian Gulf required a level of military expenditure that drained the core of the state. The policy of mass deportation, intended to break regional identities, had instead created a sprawling, resentful population that shared a common grievance against their northern masters. The provincial governors, tasked with holding these disparate territories, began to exercise greater autonomy, sensing that the central authority in Nineveh was distracted by palace intrigue and the endless demands of frontier security. As Ashurbanipal's reign drew to a close, the empire was a giant with feet of clay. The library he built served as a final testament to a world that was already beginning to slip away. He had codified the past, but he could not prevent the future. The Assyrian monopoly on violence, which had dictated the politics of the Near East for over a century, was losing its edge as neighbouring powers, the Medes and the resurgent Babylonians, began to align against the centre. The library, which preserved the memory of civilizations that had fallen, would ultimately become the tomb of the one that had gathered it. Nineveh was reaching the end of its cycle, and the forces that would eventually turn its palaces to ash were already gathering in the shadows of the mountains and the plains. By the end of the 7th century BCE, the edifice of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, built upon generations of systematic terror and military overextension, finally reached its breaking point. The cycle of vengeance that the Assyrians had fueled for over a century began to close in on them. In 612 BCE, the long-simmering resentment of the subject peoples crystallized into an existential threat. A coalition of enemies, the Babylonians, now led by the ambitious Nabolassar, and the Medes, a fierce and rising power from the Iranian plateau, converged upon the heart of the Assyrian state. They were not merely seeking territory, they were seeking the absolute eradication of the power that had terrorized the Near East for so long. The siege of Nineveh was the climax of this geopolitical firestorm. The city, which had stood as the most sophisticated and fortified administrative centre in the world, was suddenly transformed into a trap. For months the coalition forces hammered against its massive walls. The Assyrians, weakened by internal succession struggles and the erosion of their military logistics, fought with the desperation of a regime that knew no mercy and therefore expected none. When the walls finally breached, aided, according to some accounts, by the surging floodwaters of the Tigris, the destruction was total. Nineveh was not just conquered, it was methodically erased. Palaces were burned, temples were levelled, and the symbols of Assyrian pride were ground into the dust. The fall of Nineveh sent a shockwave across the ancient world. For the peoples who had lived under the shadow of the Assyrian iron fist, the destruction of the capital was viewed as an act of divine justice. The city that had deported populations and raised kingdoms was itself emptied, its people slaughtered or scattered. The library of Ashurbanipal, ironically, survived in part because the collapse of the palace roofs buried the clay tablets, shielding them from the fires that consumed the city. The archives that had been meant to glorify the Assyrian kings instead became the quiet witnesses to their extinction. With Nineveh reduced to a smouldering ruin, the Assyrian Empire vanished almost overnight. Its collapse left a massive power vacuum, but it also fundamentally shifted the psychological landscape of Mesopotamia. The era of the universal empire maintained by fear had proven to be unsustainable. The Medes returned to their mountain strongholds, leaving the riches of the Mesopotamian plains to the Babylonians. Thus, from the rubble of the fallen northern tyrant, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the final brilliant and fleeting flowering of Mesopotamian civilization, began to take shape. Nabopolassar and his son, Nebuchadnezzar II, stood amidst the ruins and began to dream of a new Babylon, one that would not rely on the cruelty of the Assyrians, but on the restoration of ancient splendor, architectural grandeur, and the return of the gods to their rightful homes. The Iron Century had ended. The Golden Twilight was about to begin. With the annihilation of Nineveh, the center of gravity in Mesopotamia shifted definitively back to the south. The rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire was not merely a change in administrative management, it was a cultural renaissance, a grand attempt to reclaim the soul of the ancient world. At the center of this resurgence stood Nebuchadnezzar II, a king whose ambition was to mold Babylon into an architectural manifestation of divine order and imperial majesty. Under his rule, Babylon was transformed from a city into a myth, a sprawling metropolis of glazed blue bricks, soaring ziggurats and grand avenues that served as the theatre for the religious and political life of the civilized world. Nebuchadnezzar's most iconic legacy was the physical reconstruction of the city. He replaced the grim, militarized architecture of the Assyrians with a vision of beauty and permanence. The Ishtar Gate, with its shimmering cobalt tiles and intricate reliefs of bulls and dragons, served as a stunning entrance to the city, announcing to every visitor that they were crossing into a realm favored by the gods. The processional way, lined with vibrant walls of enameled brick, led pilgrims and ambassadors alike toward the Itamananki, the great ziggurat dedicated to Marduk. It was a landscape designed to overwhelm the senses, a deliberate use of aesthetics to solidify the city's status as the gate of the gods. And then there was the legend of the Hanging Gardens, a marvel of hydraulic engineering that brought the lush flora of the mountains to the arid heart of the plains, a testament to the king's ability to command nature itself for the sake of royal prestige. Yet this golden age was built upon a foundation of renewed centralized authority. Nebuchadnezzar was not just a builder, he was a stern custodian of the Babylonian identity. His foreign policy was assertive, focused on securing the trade routes that fed the city's immense appetite for prestige materials: cedar from Lebanon, stone from the mountains, and gold from the west. His conquest of Jerusalem, while infamously recorded in the annals of history for the displacement of the Jewish population, was a geopolitical necessity in his struggle against Egyptian hegemony. By consolidating his grip on the Levant, he ensured that Babylon remained the undisputed arbiter of the Near East. However, beneath the blue bricks and the grand processions, the empire remained an enterprise centered entirely on the person of the king. The Neo-Babylonian state was a high-culture bureaucracy deeply invested in astronomy, record-keeping, and the preservation of rituals. They were the inheritors of the Sumerian intellectual tradition, the Akkadian imperial ambition, and the Babylonian legal framework, all fused into a final brilliant synthesis. But as Nebuchadnezzar beautified his capital, he was perhaps unaware that the world was changing around him. The empire was a brilliant fire burning brightly at the end of the night. It was the last truly indigenous Mesopotamian power, and in its obsession with the past and its grandeur, it was becoming increasingly isolated from the geopolitical shifts occurring in the Iranian highlands to the east, where the Persians were already beginning to stir. Babylon had reached the peak of its beauty, but it would be a fleeting glory, destined to be the final chapter of a story that began in the mud-brick villages of the 4th millennium BCE. The glory of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was, in hindsight, the final shimmering sunset of an ancient world. Following the death of the great builder king in 562 BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire began to fracture, under the weight of internal dynastic instability and social friction. The city had become a self-contained universe, obsessed with its own religious rituals and historical legacy, often at the expense of necessary political adaptation. While the Babylonian elite debated the nuances of Marduk's liturgy and managed their vast temple estates, a revolutionary shift was occurring in the highlands to the east. In the land of Persis, a new power was coalescing, the Achaemenid Empire, led by a charismatic and strategic visionary, Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was not a conqueror in the traditional Mesopotamian mold, where the Assyrians had relied on terror and the Babylonians on the weight of their own cultural prestige. Cyrus offered a new paradigm, integration and religious tolerance. As he expanded his empire across the Median and Lydian territories, his military machine moved with a level of coordination and logistical superiority that made the aging Babylonian defences look archaic. The Babylonian leadership, meanwhile, was paralyzed by political division. The final king, Nabonidus, alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk by favouring the moon god Sin and spending long periods away from the capital in the desert of Tamar. This internal schism created a vacuum of legitimacy that Cyrus was perfectly poised to exploit. In 539 BCE, the inevitable collision occurred. Rather than a desperate fire-scorched siege like the one that levelled Nineveh, the fall of Babylon was a calculated manoeuvre. According to historical records, Cyrus's forces diverted the waters of the Euphrates, allowing them to enter the city under the cover of night. There was little resistance. For many of the disenfranchised subjects within Babylon, including the long-exiled Jewish population, Cyrus arrived not as a destroyer, but as a potential liberator. The city, with all its grand gates and impregnable walls, surrendered with a whimper rather than a roar. Cyrus's entry into Babylon was a masterpiece of political theatre. He did not sack the city, he walked through the Ishtar Gate as a restorer of order. By participating in the rituals of Marduk and declaring himself the rightful successor to the ancient kings, he effectively neutralized any potential for revolt. It was the end of the last independent Mesopotamian empire, but it was also the beginning of a truly trans-regional, multicultural imperial model. Babylon was no longer the center of the world, but it remained the heart of the new Persian administration, a jewel in the crown of a vast globalized state. The transition marked the final departure of the ancient Mesopotamian era, where the power of the land was no longer held by those who claimed the river's silt, but by those who could weave the diverse tapestry of the world into a single, unified administrative fabric. The age of the city-state, the age of the god-king, and the age of the river civilization had officially passed into the realm of history. While the empires of Sumer, Akkad, Assyria and Babylon have long since crumbled into the silt of the Tigris and Euphrates, their most enduring structures were not made of mud brick, but of pure intellect. The true legacy of Mesopotamia lies in the way they taught humanity to perceive, measure, and organize the chaotic reality of the physical world. Centuries before the emergence of Western philosophy, the scribes of Mesopotamia were already engaged in a project of profound abstraction, transforming the ephemeral flow of life into the rigid, predictable language of mathematics. This was the birth of the analytical mind, a development that would ripple across the millennia to define the modern scientific method. The most ubiquitous vestige of their genius remains hidden in plain sight, embedded in the very fabric of our daily lives, the sexagesimal system. Unlike the decimal system based on 10 fingers, the Sumerians utilized a base 60 system, a mathematical choice that proved exceptionally versatile for division and complex calculation. It is this ancient structure that governs our world today. When we divide an hour into 60 minutes and a minute into 60 seconds, we are participating in a system codified by Mesopotamian astronomers nearly 5,000 years ago. Similarly, the division of a circle into 360 degrees, a fundamental necessity for navigation, architecture, and trigonometry, finds its genesis in the observations of these ancient scholars who linked the movement of the heavens to the geometry of the earth. Beyond mathematics, the Mesopotamians were the pioneers of observational science. Their dedication to documenting celestial phenomena, predicting eclipses, tracking the cyclical patterns of planets and mapping the constellations was not merely a tool for divination or royal legitimation. It was the foundation of empirical observation. By logging these data points over centuries, they created a historical record of the cosmos, treating the sky as a vast archive of information. This rigorous, standardized approach to record-keeping allowed them to identify patterns in nature that were invisible to the naked eye. In doing so, they moved humanity away from a purely reactive relationship with the environment toward a predictive, proactive understanding of the universe. This intellectual heritage became a bridge between the ancient Near East and the burgeoning civilizations of the Mediterranean. Through trade, cultural exchange, and the migrations of scholars, the knowledge of Mesopotamia flowed westward, influencing the Greek thinkers, who would eventually build upon these foundations to create the edifice of modern science. When we look at a clock, navigate by the stars, or apply geometric formulas to build our own structures, we are using the tools they forged in the fires of their ziggurats. They taught us that the world is not merely a collection of random events, but a system that can be parsed, measured, and understood. The mud brick cities have vanished, but the architecture of human thought, as laid out by the scribes of the fertile plain, remains the bedrock upon which our modern civilization stands. Beyond the precision of their mathematics and the grandeur of their ziggurats, the true, intimate legacy of the Mesopotamians resides in their struggle to define what it means to be a civilized human being. This search for meaning was articulated through two primary vehicles, the invention of the legal code and the creation of literature. Long before the Roman Republic or modern judicial systems, the Mesopotamians grappled with the fundamental problem of human coexistence. The Code of Hammurabi was not merely a list of punishments, it was a profound philosophical statement. By placing his laws upon a public scale, Hammurabi asserted that the law belonged to the realm of the objective, that it was a shared standard, an arbiter between the powerful and the weak, and a protective barrier against the chaos of unbridled vengeance. This transition from the arbitrary command of a tribal leader to the codified rule of a state is perhaps the most significant single step in the history of human governance. While the legal code sought to organize the external world, the literature of Mesopotamia sought to explain the internal one. No work captures this better than the Epic of Gilgamesh. As the oldest epic poem in human history, it is not merely a tale of a king's exploits, it is the first great existential meditation of our species. Through the journey of Gilgamesh, the quest for immortality, the grief over the death of his companion Enkidu, and the eventual painful acceptance of his own mortality, the Mesopotamians dared to ask the questions that still haunt us today. Why must we die? What is the purpose of a legacy? How can a human find meaning in a world that is inherently ephemeral? In the character of Gilgamesh, we see the archetype of the human condition, a creature caught between the divine ambition for eternal life and the tragic reality of biological limitation. The fact that this story was copied, translated and revered for thousands of years across the Near East shows that it struck a universal chord. It taught that true immortality is not found in the physical body, but in the memory of one's deeds and the lasting impact of one's contributions to the collective life of the city. Literature became the vessel through which the Mesopotamians preserved their wisdom, their fears, and their hopes. These two pillars, the rule of law and the literary exploration of the human soul, represent the maturation of the human intellect. The Mesopotamians realized that a city was more than a collection of walls and storehouses. It was a psychological space where humans could cultivate justice and reflection. When we study the foundations of our own legal systems or find comfort in the timeless narratives of human struggle, we are inheriting the very spirit of that first civilization. They were the first to write, the first to legislate, and the first to weep for the inevitable end of life, and in doing so, they left us with the vocabulary to express our own journey. As we draw the curtains on our journey through the cradle of civilization, we are left with a profound sense of continuity. For over 3 millennia, the Mesopotamian plain served as the world's great laboratory for human potential. From the first cuneiform impressions on damp clay in Uruk to the zenith of Babylonian science, the peoples of the Tigris and Euphrates were engaged in an unprecedented project, the creation of a world governed by law, defined by architecture, and understood through the rigors of logic. They were the first to organize humanity on a massive scale, the first to dream of a unified empire, and the first to confront the terrifying silence of eternity through literature and myth. The history of Mesopotamia is ultimately a study in the paradox of stability and fragility. Their civilization was born from the bounty of the rivers, yet it was constantly threatened by the very environment that sustained it. Their empires were built to endure for eternity, yet they fell under the pressure of changing climates, internal decay, and the restless migrations of distant peoples. When we look at their story, we are not looking at a distant, alien past, we are looking at a mirror of our own future. Their successes, the development of bureaucracy, the codification of justice, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge are the pillars upon which our own civilization rests. Their failures, the arrogance of over-centralization, the exploitation of the environment, and the reliance on fear to maintain order remain the timeless warnings that shadow every modern state. The legacy of Mesopotamia does not live in the eroded mounds of the ziggurats or the shattered ruins of Nineveh. It lives in the way we count time, in the legal principles we demand from our leaders, and in the existential questions we ask about our own mortality. They were the pioneers who broke the seal of the primordial dark, proving that human beings could master their surroundings through the sheer force of collective intelligence. While their languages have fallen silent and their temples have long since crumbled, the Mesopotamian moment, that brief, brilliant intersection of geography, ingenuity, and ambition, continues to echo through the corridors of our modern world. As we stand in the 21st century, gazing into a future that feels as complex and volatile as the world of the ancient city-states, we might find some comfort in their story. We are the descendants of their innovation, the heirs to their intellectual rigor, and the stewards of the civilization they first imagined. The Fertile Crescent reminds us that civilization is not a static state of being. It is a precarious, beautiful process. It is a work in progress, etched into the clay of our history, waiting to be rewritten by every generation that dares to believe that order can be found in chaos, and that even in the face of time, the human spirit can leave a mark that lasts for eternity. The rivers still flow, the sands continue to shift, and the story of Mesopotamia, our story, remains unfinished. Sleepy History with Kevin is created for relaxation, entertainment, and sleep purposes. The stories shared on this channel are inspired by historical events, daily life, and real periods in history, but they may be simplified, adapted, or narrated in a calming way to enhance the listening experience. This content is not intended to be a precise academic or educational source. While we aim to stay generally accurate, some details may be altered for storytelling flow and relaxation. Please do not rely on this channel as a primary source for historical research or study. By listening, you acknowledge that this content is designed to help you unwind, relax, and fall asleep. Thank you for your understanding and support.